What's up, everybody? It's Alex from Heavy New York, and on the phone we got Martin of Hyborian. Thank you for your time, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, man.
Yeah, it's so awesome to have you here. Volume 2 is now officially out. Do you just want to give like a rundown on how the making of this record was in terms of the songwriting and the recording and mixing and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, it was, I guess we came off a tour about this time last year and hunkered down for, let's see, most of March, April, and May, and wrote pretty much everything. We had all the instrumentals done before we went into studio. A lot of the vocals themselves got written in studio. We ended up recording at a place here in Kansas City called B24 Studios with Josh Barber, who's done a bunch of like Norma Jean, Every Time I Die, stuff like that. Really great guy, super great producer. The lyrics kind of, while we weren't really done with the lyrics when we went into the studio, the concept was done because this record goes along with a novel that I wrote last year as well. That came out in May of last year. So the lyrics kind of, we already knew what we needed to write about, so it was more a matter of like finishing up arrangements in studios and then fitting lyrics to it.
Mm-hmm.
But Josh did a really fantastic job. We kind of came into the project with, he's kind of known for really polished, high production level projects, and we are a live band for sure, way more than we are a studio band, and so we really wanted to make sure that like live urgency came through on the recording. And so his idea for the way to record this was just to do everything live takes, use only outboard gear, no in the box editing, no in the box production really. So it's just basically we just like played everything until it was right, and got a solid board mix and then printed it, and that was the record.
Awesome. I didn't know that this album was actually based off of a novel that you wrote, so now this just opened up a whole new level of this interview. But like, being that like, this really influenced the lyrics and stuff like that, did that also maybe help determine the outcome of the music itself as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We tried very hard to write the record in a sequential fashion so that like the feel of the music matched the stuff that's going on in the story as well. Because basically the album is a story from track 1 to track 8. It's all a contiguous story all the way through. So yeah, basically the things that are happening in the story, we hope are represented by the music as well.
Mm-hmm. It's always cool like that. There's so many bands that seem to use literature as like a subject matter for music. Like I know that Ahab did that off of one of their albums. I know that Ice Nine Kills did that off of one of their albums. So it's really interesting. So being that there's a whole narrative, do you prefer or do you recommend if a listener were to start this record off with Driven by Hunger and end it with In the Hall of the Travelers, or could a listener approach this record from any direction?
I mean, I think that it's, I would like to think that the songs stand alone, but obviously it's a high concept record. So it's not just like, here's the beginning of the song, here's the end of the song. The track markers don't necessarily all line up with the beginning of the musical piece. Sometimes they're placed for, like say on like Planet Destructor, that Planet Destructor, the actual musical composition starts about a minute before the Planet Destructor track marker happens. But if you were going to listen to it just as one song, we put the track marker where we thought that would be most convenient for the listener, so you didn't have to have a long, drawn-out intro, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think that the record is taken best as a whole, front to back. I think like the closest comparison would be like, if you listen to Crimson King in the Court of the Crimson King, or King Crimson in the Court of the Crimson King, like there's some songs on there that if you just drop the needle halfway through the record, you're like, what is going on? what is this? But I'd like to think that all of the songs on this record do stand alone, mm-hmm. on their own feet.
Mm-hmm. being that there was a whole concept behind this album, does it have any relation to Volume 1 as well? Like, could this also serve as like a direct follow-up to that, or is this kind of like a new start in a way for Hyborian?
Basically, when we started this band, we set out to do a trilogy of records, at least to start with, Volume 1 being the first. And so, like, we have like a kind of central figure in our mythos called the Traveler, who's obviously the hooded figure on the cover of both records. Volume 1 is all like stories that supposedly were like handed down to us from the Traveler from prehistory. So like from mankind's history before the advent of the written word, which is also kind of where our name comes from. Robert E. Howard, that wrote the Conan novels, invented this thing called the Hyborian Age that was supposedly between the fall of Atlantis and the advent of the written word. So that's kind of where we got the name from. But the stories on Volume 1 they're not necessarily, it's not a continuous narrative. They're each their own. Each song is its own thing.
Okay.
But then Volume 2 is kind of an origin story for the Traveler, but it occurs at the end of all existence. It occurs like as the universe is kind of falling apart and winking out of existence. And then Volume 3, our plan is for it to be roughly in the modern age, not necessarily like right now, but just like the modern industrial age.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. It almost seems like, but your albums aren't like Lord of the Rings in a way, right? Where you like have to start off with Volume 1 before you listen to Volume 2, and you have to listen. Okay. Is the music also open to interpretation, or do you try to maybe engage the listeners into what Hyborian's music could be about?
I mean, if you haven't read the novel, obviously you can't cram 70,000 words worth of lyrics into a record. So
unless you're Opeth.
That's a whole other interview on its own. But yeah, so the lyrics are vague enough that, especially if you're taking it song by song, it could be a bunch of different things. And if you haven't read the novel, there's a lot of room for different interpretation, and we encourage that. But like obviously we're trying to like build a mythology. We do a lot of cryptography in both albums. There's hidden messages all over the place, from backtracking to Morse code to less obvious things that no one has figured out yet. Some of the more obvious things that people have messaged us about and have figured stuff out, which is cool. But there's a whole lot of stuff that nobody's figured out yet, which is also kind of cool, I think.
Mm-hmm. Being both a musician and a writer, is there like a similar creative energy into how you write a story versus how you write music? Is there a similar creative energy in that, or is it almost kind of like a separate art altogether?
No, it's a very, very, very different thing. Writing music, especially in Hyborian, is a very collaborative thing. The three of us write everything together, with the exception of the lyrics, which on Volume 2, Ryan actually co-wrote a bunch of the lyrics with me. Not all of them, but a lot. But as far as the music goes, our writing process is about as collaborative as it could possibly be. Even to the point where we don't even use like a majority rules thing. Like if anybody doesn't like anything, it's gone. Like we all have to agree on everything all the time. It's a very enjoyable process. We enjoy each other's company. We have a good time in the rehearsal space. Writing with those guys is actually my favorite part of being in the band. But writing the written word stuff is a battle. It's a knockdown, drag out, almost torturous thing. It's not my favorite thing in the world to do. But it's like running a marathon where like you're miserable while you're doing it, but you feel really good when you're done.
Well, that's funny, but I'd imagine because like writing stories, it's solely you. Does that have to have a little bit more creative independence since Hyborian is so collaborative?
Yeah, definitely. I just, I'm not, I think that this book turned out well, but, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, so it's probably a little bit more of a struggle for me to do stuff like that than it is to do the music stuff, which comes really naturally to me.
Mm-hmm. In order to like get inspired, this could go for both music or for literature, but like in order to get inspired, do you like look for inspiration, or do you just think of ideas out of the blue sometimes?
Um, for all of this stuff, really the inspiration is always just the three of us getting together and hanging out, and we're, like we party pretty hard, and so a lot of the ideas for all of this stuff have just come from those, the conversations that everybody has with their friends when you smoke a little and you drink a little, and the conversation gets weird and you get really excited about something while you're drunk, and then the next day you're like, man, that was a little weird, but there's a kernel of awesomeness in that, and the next day you revisited it and find something to move forward with.
Okay. Fair enough. I kind of wanted to go back to the making of this album because, working with Josh Barber, who, as you said, has worked with Norma Jean and a lot of other great bands, and I know that you had Nick Zampello, who also mixed and mastered the album. I'd imagine that working. I've always said that the
Josh Nick did the mastering.
Oh.
Okay. But Nick also mastered Volume 1 as well. Like, we really like him a lot, and probably will always work with him until the day we stop making music.
That's awesome. But I've always said that a producer and a mixer is like the fourth Beatle, the fifth Beatle, sixth Beatle if you're in Slipknot, the 11th Beatle, something like that. I'd imagine that working with a producer and a mixer, it also has to help you bring some newer ideas to Hyborian as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We even to the point of like Josh played a hand in some of the arrangement on Expanse. He had a big hand in actually like taking that song and making it a song. Like we brought it to the studio. Like none of the riffs changed or anything like that, but the order the riffs were played in was drastically changed from the moment we walked into the studio to the moment we left. And Josh really he played a big part in taking that and turning it into a song.
That's incredible. In terms of like your guitar playing and stuff, do you actually have like a background in theory? Because I was really impressed with the arrangement and the melody and the usages of it. Like, do you have like a background in theory? Like, what scale or key you're working off of? Or
yeah,
is it...
I grew up in music lessons and scholastic music. I even went to college for a short amount of time for music composition before the band I was in started touring, and I realized I don't need a degree in music composition to be in a metal band. But yeah, no, I'm not gonna like sit down with some jazz wizard and argue things and sound like I know what I'm talking about. But yeah, we all have a fairly decent foundation in that.
Mm-hmm. So do you when you are like when you're conversing with the other musicians about it, like, no, you got to use this scale or you got to use this key, like,
no.
That you don't think about that when you're writing.
Really, it's when we're writing, we all have our instruments, so it's not, there's not a lot of hey, do this kind of stuff. It's like somebody will play something and somebody will like, oh, that's really cool, I like this about it, what if we did this here? There's not a whole lot of theory talk in the rehearsal space. I think just maybe having that background allows us to come up with some more interesting ideas than we would otherwise.
Mm-hmm. And I have two more questions for you. You ready for the most difficult question of the interview? I stumble everybody with this one. All right. So you have a song like In the Hall of Travelers, which is 8 minutes. You have a song like The Entity, that's just under 4 minutes. You have Driven by Hunger, that's 5 minutes. How do you know when a song is done?
It's really different for every song. Like, and a lot of times when we're writing, like Driven by Hunger is a really good example. Our first draft of that was like almost 9 minutes long. And it just even way before we even got into the studio, there was like a whole like second section of that song that went a completely different direction, and it just ended up on the chopping room floor because we didn't think it was necessary, and then it kind of took away from the power of the song. It's really just it's kind of a esoteric thing. It's just what feels right to us, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. You ever worried that like the original way that the song was supposed to go will be like a B-side one day and just be the biggest hit you guys ever had?
Oh, nobody cares enough to dig through our hard drives, man.
Hey, you never know. Never say never. And the final question I wanted to ask you is coming from Kansas City, I actually heard that there's a pretty decent metal scene down there right now. Is there kind of like a scene that you guys are really affiliated with in Kansas City, or do you prefer to play like outside your hometown a little bit more?
Up until a couple weeks ago, yeah, I would definitely definitely say the metal scene here is fantastic. We have a really, I mean, outside of St. Vitus, probably in my opinion, the best metal club in America is in Kansas City. It's called the Riot Room. I'm an audio engineer there when they're open and not closed down because of pandemic things. I mean, like, I've mixed everybody from Deicide to Vader to Veil of Nath to Abysmal Dawn to Numenorian. Like, I mean, all this year. Like, the scene here is absolutely insane. People would be really shocked to know, like, how many, like, really, like, heavy-duty up-and-coming bands are coming out of Kansas City right now, too. Otme on Unique Leader. There's a really good tech death band called Sedlick Ossuary that's kind of just getting started here in Kansas City right now that's going to be making, I would imagine, some very serious waves in the next couple of years because they are, like, Archfire caliber musicians, and they're young and they're driven and they're going to be doing some things. And there's a label here that we actually started off on before we signed to Season of Mist called The Company, who puts out stuff for everybody from like Druids to Orphans of Doom to gosh, who else have they done? Merlin. It really, there's the guy that runs that label. His name's Josh Wilkinson, and he's not a musician. He's just really, really passionate about music, and he's done a lot over the last probably 7 or 8 years here in Kansas City to really help like unify the metal scene, whereas it used to be very, very fragmented. We're like, oh, these are the death metal kids, these are the doom and stoner metal kids, these are the thrash kids. Like Kansas City is a small enough market that all of that's kind of gelled into one thing. It's like the thrash kids will be at doom shows, and even the thrash kids will end up going to like epic folk metal shows. Which I feel like is a very unique occurrence. Like, you don't see a lot of battle vests at Merker shows, you know?
Yeah. Wow, that's impressive. That's pictures or it didn't happen. I don't believe it. And I'd imagine working behind the soundboard there is also maybe has to give you some ideas as well, right?
Man, it's really just, outside of playing music, I really love that. I'm missing it a lot right now. Since all the venues in town have shut down, I'm delivering pizza and just kind of living this like waking pepperoni smell nightmare.
I'm very sorry about that.
We'll get back to work for real someday here, right?
Yeah, definitely. I've always said, everybody, like, look, knocking on wood, when the decade starts off this bad, that means it can't get any worse, right?
You know, you'd think.
Yeah, you know what? I'll just shut the hell up right now. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Is there just anything else with Hyborian that you would like to promote for Volume 2? Like, I'd imagine, when all this shit is over, we could possibly be seeing you on the road fairly soon, right?
Basically, as soon as our booking agent tells us that he's willing to take a risk on booking something, we're going to be on the road. We actually... are very, very bummed out to not be on the road right after this record comes out. So,
is there any way that fans can support you during this time, like your merch or anything like that?
If Cartel site. It's got all kinds of T-shirts, hats, beanies. You can buy the novel there. If you just search for Hyborian Big Cartel, you'll find that. Our Bandcamp, obviously, is a great place to order stuff. The Season of Mist website, great place to order stuff. Yeah, every little bit helps.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Everybody, we are here with Martin of Hyborian, Volume 2, out now on Season of Mist. Buy it now while supplies last forever. We'll see you next time on Heavy New York.